Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another week of Wednesday Hangs Online. I got Chef with me,
What's going
and
on?
we're excited. Chef, so before we started recording, we were
Yep.
talking about how much you love sushi.
Love it.
So what is your favorite roll of sushi?
Oh, okay. So the older I get, first of all, I started off eating sushi. It was all fried. I didn't want anything raw.
I feel that, yeah.
I just didn't trust it. And then my life was changed when I had a volcano roll.
Ooh.
And so volcano roll is probably my go-to. But man, I'm pretty diverse.
Yeah.
I'll pretty do anything.
Is there what is there? Is there something that you won't touch? Like 'cause some people won't touch anything raw, and,
Yeah.
and so
In the sushi game, there's not much I won't touch. But I don't think I'll ever eat caviar.
okay. I don't know if I've had caviar.
Yeah, never.
But for those of you that have never tried sushi because you're kind of grossed out by it, I would recommend starting with a hot or fried roll because it will change your life.
Ease
Sushi
into
is so
it.
good.
So
do
good.
not make the mistake I made and go with the California roll because those are just gross.
yeah.
Those are gross.
Yeah.
So that you acquire a taste for them, but they're not
Yes.
that good. 100%. But if this is your first time joining us for Wednesday Hangs Online, text nude to the number that's on the screen. We'd love to connect with you and just send you some stuff and get to know you a little bit more. Wednesday Hangs Online exists to invite every student into a growing relationship with Jesus from our online community. And that's what we get to do week in and week out. And so over the last couple of weeks, we've been in a series called Cover to Cover.
So good.
And it has been a ton of fun. We're basically walking through the entire Bible from beginning to end and seeing like this big story that goes through it and seeing who the heroes of all these stories that we have heard and where we fall into that and things like that. And so we get to continue in that.
Yeah.
This week we're in the story of Job, which I'm super excited about. You love Job, right?
One of my favorite books of the Bible.
Yeah.
So good.
And so, Chef, last week we're in David and Goliath.
Yep.
And so Job doesn't necessarily chronologically fall after David and Goliath.
Right.
So could you just kind of catch us up, like where we are, like kind of chronologically in the Bible, but then also where the book of Job falls in the Bible and just give context to all that?
Yeah, so Job is actually one of the oldest books in the Bible. It's one of the oldest manuscripts ever found. And so some people would look at it as almost kind of like a poem sometimes, but it's not. And they don't really know who the author is. But Job literally gives so much life lessons in it. And so I love the way that, when I first found out that it's the oldest book, I'm like, okay, so this is one of the first things ever written that we using the Bible, and this is so life-giving for all of lives.
Yeah.
And so I love that God wanted us to have this book first, kind of deal.
Yeah.
Like God was like, hey, before we do anything else, you need to understand this piece about life. So super cool.
So where, like in the story, is it after? It would be after Noah, right?
It'll be after Noah. Yes.
Okay, cool. Job is super cool. And so like the big idea for this week is going to be that God did it. And so it's really cool. Just like if you know the story of Job, that big idea already kind of sounds crazy,
Right.
Because overall, Job loses everything.
Yeah.
And so this idea of God did it is pretty rough
Yeah.
to say like God let all this happen. But that's what we're going to see.
Yeah.
And so that's where we'll start at the very beginning in Job 1. And our point 1 is God gives.
Yeah.
And so what we'll see in the verses will be on the screen. We're in Job 1, and we're looking at verses 1 through 3. But it'll pop up here, and we'll read. There was a man in the country of Uz. Is it Uz or Uz?
Yes.
It's whatever you want to be. I heard as long as you say it confidently, it's correct,
it's
right?
correct.
We're going to go with Uz. I like Uz better than Uz. So there was a man in the country of Uz. Uz. Dang it. Named Job. He was a man of complete integrity who feared God and turned away from evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. His estate included 7,000 sheep and goats, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very large number of servants. Job was the greatest man among all the people of the East.
Wow.
And just a side note, if it's a yoke of oxen, that means he had 1,000 oxen total, right?
Yes. So I love the idea that Job had so much, because where I'm from, we would say that Job had guap, and so and what that means that he had a lot of money and just kind of just stacked. And so, man, knowing how much he had makes the story so much greater because you figure out how much he loses. And so I love that God starts with just kind of like, hey, let me just explain all that he had.
Yeah, and God gave Job all this. God entrusted Job with all this, which is crazy because, like, I mean, it doesn't really indicate what Job had done to receive this favor.
Right.
But God knew he was faithful, right?
Right. Yeah. Just the way Job lived his life warranted God to continue to give to Job. But that first point is pointing to Job also, that God gave to Job, but it's also pointing to another fact that God gave something else. He gave access to Job, which we'll jump into in a little bit.
Yeah. And that's kind of point two, and we'll hop into it, is that God allows Satan to take.
Right.
And so that goes into exactly what you just said in verse 8, we see that Satan comes to the Lord. And so he's basically, Satan wants to, get to messing things up. He wants to mess with someone. And so the Lord says to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? And I just want to stop there.
Yeah.
Because that's wild. Because God's like, all right, let me get this right. You want to mess with someone that cares about me.
Right.
You want to test someone.
Or my children, basically.
Yeah. And so, like, man, how would you feel if someone came to you and said, hey, like, I want to mess with one of your kids?
So, can I get real for a second?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to be real. I would watch the life leave somebody's eyes if they came towards my kids.
Yeah.
And as a father of 3, and these are my kids. Let me show you a picture of my kids. These are my kids. They're cute, and you know where that came from. So, but I would, if they ever came close to my kids, I would literally murder somebody. And that sounds very graphic and disturbing, but that is the extreme I would go to for my kids, because you don't touch my kids.
Right.
And obviously I wouldn't actually murder them, but you got to get the picture of, like, man, I would physically harm somebody.
Yeah.
And I think about a father, thinking about Job with his kids, because the first part of this passage talks about how Job would literally pray for his kids and cover his kids after they would have these festivals and these feasts. And after they had, a round of these feasts, Job would come behind and call his kids to himself, and he would pray over his kids and cover them if they had sinned when they were doing these feasts. And so you see one father in Job protecting his kids, and then you see God the Father giving access to Job to suffer. And you see, okay, so is God the bad father and is Job a good father? Like, that's not it. They're both good fathers.
Yeah.
And so as a father, I've allowed my son to have access to a bike and ride down a hill and bust his lip.
Yeah.
I've allowed my daughter to jump off a bed, hit a dresser full force, and destroy her forehead.
I've allowed 2 situations that have actually happened.
They have actually happened. I'm sorry, kids, in advance. I apologize. I should have protected you better. So, but then you got the idea of, like, okay, so is God the bad father? But then we keep reading and we see that God actually is protecting Job while he's giving access for suffering for Job. It's just wild.
Yeah, and so we'll see that if verse 8 comes back up, we'll see where God says, like, have you considered Job, my servant?
Right.
No one else on earth is like him, a man of perfect integrity who fears God and turns away from evil.
What a compliment. Woo.
And like, I want God to say that about me.
Right now, please.
And what ends up proceeding from there is that Satan goes, why would you could do all this stuff? You could literally, like, take all this stuff away, strike Job, or you could strike Job down and hurt him and all this stuff. But he would still curse you. Which, 2 things: one, it's wild to me that Satan knows that God would do that to Job, and it's like, man, how do you not know your own destiny?
Yeah, like, you not know what's coming for you.
And so what we see is that God's response in verse 12 is, very well, the Lord told Satan, everything he owns is in your power. However, do not lay a hand on Job himself.
There it is.
So Satan left the Lord's presence.
There it is.
I'm getting chills because it's like, I've known this story for a while, but as I prepared for this, that was the first time I've seen God, like, I registered that God said, hey, you can do this, but do not touch Job.
Yep.
Which means God was protecting Job, which is crazy. But on the flip side of that, you see God's absolute authority and how little authority Satan actually has.
No control, man.
And so, God commands Satan not to touch Job. And that's when Satan then leaves and then starts this testing of Job because God allowed Satan to do that, right?
And I love that what you said, because in this passage, it literally says, does Job not serve you for any reason?
Yeah.
You have put a hedge of protection over him. And that word hedge, I love that word hedge. In the Greek, it literally means that God has commanded angels surrounding Job, like literal angels. Like, this is not like, metaphorically, like, this is like Job, God had loved Job so much. He blessed him physically, but he was also blessing him spiritually. And spiritual angels were literally covering and watching over Job. And so listen what Satan's saying. I cannot touch Job because you have protected him with literal angels. And so, if you remove those things, let's see if he still allows and still blesses you and still praises you and still worships you. Let's see what happens.
And that's what's crazy to me is that Satan has just such an ignorance to go like,
pretty dumb.
Like, man, like, come on, like let's put a little friendly wager on this. Like, Satan has any authority to do that, and it's just like, it blew my mind as I prepared for all this, just to see
the pride he has, right?
The pride that he has, and just the ignorance, and like to look ahead when Satan tempts Jesus. And it's like, man, like, you couldn't even, as we'll see, Job didn't even curse God. So how do you think you're going to get the Son of God?
Great point.
Like, literally God himself to turn on God. I was like, man, like, like, when you think about the ignorance of Satan, it like almost takes away all of his power that he may, like, it almost takes away all the power of sin. Like, I'm like, man, like, why would I even want to sin?
There's no fear. There's no reason for me to ever fear what he can do.
Right. And so what we end up seeing from chapter 1, verse 12, all the way through is just different steps and challenges that come Job's way, where he loses everything. He loses his kids, loses his wife, loses any resemblance of a family he has left, all of his cattle, like basically everything that gives him value on earth. He loses everything pretty much except his land. But even then, the land is not, like, he couldn't even work on the land. And what we see is that Job's friends, and I say this because his friends come up to him and are like, man, like, God let this happen to you. Like, God is the worst.
What sin is in your life?
And they're like basically saying that this all goes back to the fact that God doesn't love you.
Right. Well, even his wife, what did his wife say?
Man, what did his wife say?
His wife literally said, what have you done? You need to curse God and die. She's like, man, what you've experienced right now, like, it's too much for me to bear and watch you like this, but it's also too much for you to bear. Why don't you just curse God and die? Like, people are looking at his life and saying, you should not be functioning.
And he's still going, because it's not just that these things are happening around him, but he also himself gains boils and things like that. Like,
bad.
He's in actual physical pain. Like, he's in every level of pain he could feel: mental, physical, emotional, spiritual. Like, he is in pain in all four facets because of all that is happening to him.
It's bad.
And does he ever curse God?
He never curses God.
Never curses God. He refutes it with knowledge and with scripture every single time. Like, man, God like has this plan. It hurts right now, but like, God is in control. And so what we see in our third point is that God restores the helpless. And so what we'll see if we jump into chapter 42, verse 10, we see it says, after Job had prayed for his friends, the Lord restored his fortunes and doubled his previous possessions.
I love it.
I think the crazy thing is that it starts this section of Job is praying. Like, the restoration happens after prayer.
And to that point, he's in constant communication with God immediately. I think as soon as either one of his last son dies, or when his first son dies, he rips his clothes off and drops down to his face and starts just to worship and weep before God. He didn't start to curse the devil. He never addresses the devil. He even acknowledges, and that's what, again, our main point is God did it. And so Job immediately starts to talk to his Father in heaven. Like, he immediately starts to say, God, what's going on? I'm here before you, nothing, broken. He never says anything to the devil because he knows ultimately who's in control of all things. And so when we step to the part where he's blessed, man, it's like he's been in constant communication with God, and God starts to restore him back to a spot where he was actually doubled in his riches. And that's tricky, right?
Right.
Why?
Well, we don't want to say like, hey, if you go through something hard,
Right.
everything's gonna be great.
Right.
Like that's not always how it works. Restoration looks different for every person.
Yes.
Job proved before this testing that he could handle what God had given him.
Correct.
But through this testing, he had nothing, had everything taken away. And God said, okay, I can trust you with a lot. I can trust you with nothing.
Yep.
So here's what I can trust you with more. And so it's not necessarily like, you don't want the motive to be like, man, like I want to go through a test so that my, like, I get double.
Yeah.
Like that's not how it works. Because yes, he had physical possessions restored in a double amount, but what he also gained spiritually, that's not even mentioned because his love for the Father probably like went to a level that none of us have really ever experienced unless we've gone through something similar to Job, because Job just absolutely relied on God the entire time.
Right. Yeah. And the cliche statement is there's a purpose to the pain. And I say cliche because you can hear that in the worst possible moments. And it's like, I need you to leave my sight, please.
Yeah.
You know, and that's not what I need to hear right now. I need you just to be here and shut up, honestly.
Right.
And that's a offensive word. I'm sorry. But so at times the cliche of purpose to the pain can be, you know, even damaging to some people.
Right.
But we see the truth behind that is that God literally took Job to a level of intimacy with himself that Job would have never. And the truth is, he would have never entered that intimacy with God if God didn't allow him to be stripped away, literally naked of all things, and suffer through the pain and rely on God like he's never relied on God before. And so there's a purpose to it, but you don't walk up saying, there's a purpose to your mom dying, there's a purpose to your mom having cancer. Like, you don't tell people that, but we ultimately know that God is doing something, and we just wait and patiently rely on him through it.
Yeah. And if you're going like, well, where is that pointed out in this? Like, I don't really understand. You can look into the New Testament. You kind of look at Romans 5, 1 through 5, where Paul talks about it, or James kind of summarizes what Paul says in Romans, in James 1, 2 through 4, where he says, rejoice in your trials, because your trials are going to produce perseverance and endurance. And that's the same thing that was done here. I mean, like, you know, you and I both sports guys, we know what it feels like to feel like you have nothing left because the coach just ran you and ran you and ran
Thanks,
you,
coach.
and you're exhausted.
You're,
you know, hands on your knees, you're dying. Coach says, put your hands on your head. Turns out, like, that's not actually helpful. Shout out to science for proving that. Shout out to my coaches for making me feel more pain for no reason. But still, like, it's through that process that we became better athletes. And it's through these trials that we become better Christians. We become more like Christ, because that is what the Christian walk is. It's a big word called sanctification. And that word sanctification means to become more like Christ, in short. And so, like, that's what these trials are for. They produce us to be more like Christ. And so if you are sitting there going like, I can't even be more like Christ because I haven't really ever had a relationship with Christ, or I've never taken Christ seriously, man, we want to talk to you. If you would text talk to the number on the screen, we have people that are ready to talk to you and work through that with you. Because before you can even go through this, like Job was a man of God and a man of integrity well before that trial happened. And it was because of that, because of his relationship with the Lord and because of his reliance on the Lord, he was able to get through this very difficult time. And so if you are sitting there kind of wrestling with that, man, we want to talk to you, right?
100%. Yeah, we definitely want you to understand that, man. The church exists for people who are suffering like this. Like the biggest mistake that people do is when they see and they experience trials like this, and I know there's some horrific stories just like this, maybe even worse than what you read here on pages, that you may have experienced. And the worst thing you can do is say, man, God, you did this, and I don't want to talk to you about it. I don't want to talk to you ever again. The walk away for this is ask God why. Like if God is the one who did it, that's our main point, right? Ask him why. And so we see Job was able to do that, and the response he got was very harsh. God was like, listen, you don't know how any of this happens. You don't know how I tell the water to stop at the sea and doesn't come and flood everything. You don't know anything. But he allows the dialogue to happen. And so God is here for it. He's here for all the smoke. You know, he's here for all the bad questions and the heartbreak you're going to come to him, and all maybe the possible bad words. I don't know. Whatever you're going to express, he's here for it. And we have the access, if we know him, if we are followers of Jesus, if we put our faith in him, he's here for all of it. And the dialogue is possible with him if we say, God, why? And so ask him. You have the freedom if you know him. If you you put your faith in Jesus, you have that access.
And he wants you to ask questions.
Yeah.
Because like, what good would your parents be if you never asked your parents questions?
Gosh.
You would learn nothing.
Nothing.
So yeah, we want to encourage you. Like if you are going through a difficult time, like, man, ask God why, and he may give you a response. He may say, you don't get to know why. And like, you just have to trust, the storm that was raging when, the disciples like, Jesus, wake up. It ended when Jesus was ready for it to end, not when the disciples were ready for it to end. And so anyways, man, thank you guys for joining us, Chef. Thank you for being on. If you'll stay on, you'll see that we have some questions that we want you guys to work through, think about, and really kind of wrestle with, because these questions are designed to help you kind of process what we just talked about. So I'd encourage you to take some time as they come up on the screen, write them down, give some space, and write out your thoughts. I know that's helped me a lot, especially in my quiet time, just like writing out the thoughts that I have. And if you're with a group, if you're watching with some friends, take a picture and tag us on social media. We would love to see you. We'd love to connect with you. Because if you have a watch party going on, man, we want to send you some stuff to help that watch party be better. And if you want to have a watch party, you're like, I don't know how to do this well, reach out to us. Hit us up with the new, and we'll talk with you. We'll get you figured out and get you set up for success, because that's what we want. So, Chef, you got anything else?
No, man. I'm glad to be here.
Man, thank you guys so much for joining, and we'll catch you next week. See you guys.